Welcome to the Ghost Furnace Podcast. If you have a paranormal experience of your own that you would like to share, please email it to us at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy the show, please rate, subscribe, and review on whichever platform you use. Also, like and share us on Instagram and Facebook. The hosts of the Ghost Furnace Podcast are Nick Pennsylvania, Bond, sometimes referred to as Brendan, and Mike. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Well, it's actually me getting an opportunity to interview somebody this time around, and I recently was able to sit down with my friend Brian. Now, I've known Brian for a little over 10 years now, and I'm kind of surprised to say that. I met Brian through work, and we worked at an agency together for some time. And Brian's a super interesting guy, a real kind of, if you would think he would be a no-nonsense guy, but a lot of interest. He's a ham radio operator, and we would talk about that. But it was a couple years after knowing him and talking about various historical and weather and radio things where I was told, oh, Brian's got some really interesting ghost stories. And so we talked about ghost things a bit, and we would trade books quite frequently on supernatural as well as on historical things. And when we started doing this, the Ghost Furnace, Brian was pretty early into checking it out. And he told me that, hey, I had this really interesting experience I don't think I've ever told you about. If you ever want to. And so, of course, I wanted to. So I reached out to him the other day, and we sat down and we spent the better part of an hour talking, and I've trimmed that down a little bit. So what you'll hear now is an excerpt or an edited version of Brian's story.
Well, the farm goes way back. The original part of the farmhouse was built. It actually shows up in the plat maps of the Mercer County 1877 history book, which you can find in rare libraries, Teal or Grove City College, and Mercer Historical Society. It's a very large volume. And the actual property was built by a family called Turner. And I don't know much about them, but it goes as far back as really probably the mid 1800s. So it's a very old dwelling, an old farm. I mean, the property is really the same as it's always been. As I said before, is about a 23-acre field where the event occurred. And near as I can tell, and I really hadn't given it much thought until more recently with the advent of the Travel Channel and all of the shows, I think that's where this whole memory re-triggered again, because what I'm going to kind of share with you is something that I have not shared with anybody but you on a personal basis ever before. It was, near as I can remember, it was around 2002, 2003. It occurred about this time of year. It was like between May and June. That time period. This is before the advent of smartphones, before, we didn't really have digital cameras to the level that we have. We did have video recording equipment if you were so inclined, but generally things were just internet based. You didn't have a lot of electronics to record things like many of the cryptid shows of today have. The technology was different. And I was reclining, this was before I was actually married, and I was in this family dwelling where I resided. I looked out the front window, which really goes towards this field. And it was probably about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And there was this very, very large black bird of some kind. Near as what I can describe to you, it was like a raven, but on steroids. And it looked like it was something related to either the raven or the crow or starling family, but it was very, very huge. And it was probably within 50 yards of the dwelling, which I was looking out the window at my grandparents' farm. It was one of disbelief. And I looked at it, and it looked as if it was on the ground preying on some kind of prey that it had caught. Potentially had to have been something fairly large. This bird was so large, it had a very very pointed black beak. The whole bird was black, and at the time I didn't think it was I didn't know what I was looking at. Today, you might hear about a thunderbird. That's probably one of the more mythological creatures that might resemble it. It had a very short neck, mostly black, but there was gray feathers. The feathers were not smooth. They were very ruffled, and there was a brown and there was gray in the feathers. And as I was watching it, I'm thinking, wow, that's a really, really big bird, because it's not uncommon in these parts to have starlings, crows, hawks, eagles, turkey vultures are very common around fields.
Now, if you had to guess the
But
size, how big would you say it was?
it had to be plus 10 feet. As it was feeding, I was watching it, and keep in mind, I was inside. I was a little bit taken aback by what I was looking at, and so I did not want to spook the bird. And so I quietly was watching it, and as it would feed, it would open up its wings and it would move about. And it really appeared, and just the body of it was probably 4 feet at least. And the wingspan, from what I could determine, was probably plus 10 feet in length from one end to the next. I would even go, I don't want to exaggerate. It could have been 12, it could have been 15, but it was extraordinarily large. It was quite unusual. It was not consistent with a turkey vulture, because you can tell what a turkey vulture looks like. It's very common. It's ugly. It doesn't have a smooth or polished presentation. Again, this looked like a raven on steroids. It was very extraordinarily huge and quite uncharacteristic for this area.
I think I've shared with you the first time I saw a bald eagle in the wild. Now their numbers are up quite a bit now, and it's not as uncommon, but this would have been around 2011, right as their numbers were starting to come up. I was in Potter County. I was trying to find a place, and I passed a camp, and I saw a bald eagle statue, and I noticed it. I had to turn around just a little down the road, and I'm coming back, and I know this bald eagle statue was tearing a deer apart. And yeah, it probably stood. It had to stand at least as high as my waist, probably a little higher. It took me aback how large it was. I'd never seen one outside of an aviary. I'd never seen one on the ground. I'd never seen one that close. I was probably, and it really took me back just how large it was.
Yeah, I think for me, I was very startled because I had lived in this area all my life. From the time I was a very small child, I spent significant amounts of time on my grandparents' farm where this field was, where this bird of prey was. And I had never in my life, and I had farmed this property with my grandfather. I'd been all over those fields as a child, so I knew them pretty well. And, it's not uncommon, again, for a turkey vulture to be hunting, for there to be groundhogs in the field. I mean, that's just part of farmlands. But this was so different. The thing was extraordinarily huge. And it was, I look back on it, and it was almost like, am I really seeing what I'm seeing? And I was just like startled. And it reminds me of a lot of the documentation that people provide on Sasquatch, when they see this hairy being that kind of looks like a person, but really doesn't, and they don't know what they're seeing. And it's almost like they dissociate, or they're not sure what they're seeing is really a part of what they're seeing. And I did creep out. It was probably within 5 minutes of watching this, and I wanted to get a look a little bit closer. So I creeped out of the house, went around the corner, and watched it from the corner of the home. I did not want it to see me for fear it would spook or get up and go. So it was probably here for at least 10 minutes. And then something, the country road that goes past the residence comes to a T to a very busy state road. And so there's a lot of automobiles and so forth. And it did startle. Something startled it. And then I saw the complete wingspan at that point. And I think I said a couple expletives at the time. So unbelievable. And then you just watched it. It just kind of it just flapped and just made this vertical rise. And I think it still had whatever it was eating in its claws. And the thing just flapped away. and I didn't really give it much thought. I just said, this is really weird. I don't know what I just saw. I think we're just not going to really talk about it much. In recent years, with the advent of the Travel Channel and History Channel and some of these other programs, this stuff is all over the place. And so I've seen a lot of stories about it recently, and have started to think about, is that what I really saw? And interestingly, people have talked about how Thunderbirds have their origins in Native American folklore and stories and so forth, and that's a big part of where they were. But most of the time, you hear about that stuff in the Pacific Northwest or British Columbia or Alaska or Washington State. You don't hear about it in Pennsylvania. And so I did a little bit more research here recently, I think prior to reaching out to you. And there's a 2-volume series of books that was written on the subject of this mythological creature, the Thunderbird, in Pennsylvania. And the name of the book that I found it's called Amazing Indeed, by Robert Lyman. But he goes into talking about how there were several sightings that go as far back in Pennsylvania lore into the 1800s by pioneers, settlers. Most of these sightings were in the northern tier of the ridge running area of Pennsylvania. Those kind of places along Interstate 80 is where there's been reports. And these go all the way back to 1800s. I think this book I don't know if it's out of print. I've been looking for it. I did see it on eBay for a very high price, and I decided to pass it up, but I'm going to keep looking. But I was amazed at the picture on top of the book itself. It had this the bird, the way it's illustrated is exactly what I saw. And it's so strange. And I was like amazed that there was actually something written about this in Pennsylvania. The other thing that I looked at recently, I went online and just made a random query on Google about Greenville Thunderbird sightings in Greenville, which Hadley, where this was at, is really very close to Greenville as well. It's a neighboring village. And lo and behold, there was a posting and an article referenced about an amateur bird watcher who in 2001, 2002 era had actually seen one of these winged birds east of Greenville, which is exactly where I'm at.
It makes me wonder, unless you have like the specific time it happened, or if this bird watcher does, if it wasn't the same animal that you had seen even.
It's entirely possible. I know it was, the residence was built in 2001. So it's entirely possible. I know it was before I was actually married, which was in 2005. So I know it was in that area where I was still living as a single person and wasn't married, didn't have a family yet or anything. And, it happened around that corridor, but I found that so unusual. What is the chances of there being why would there be a posting? Why would anyone put a posting about Greenville, Pennsylvania, east of Greenville, Pennsylvania, this sighting of this bird? And the description was very similar, around a 15-foot wingspan. This was an amateur bird watcher. But then there's also other references to the bird being located in Greensburg, and there's been references of Erie around Presque Isle or that area as well. So in addition to the ridge running areas of Pennsylvania, obviously there's something else going on here that we're not really aware of that's quite unusual.
Well, and one of the things that when you initially told me that you had this story about this large unknown bird, one of the first things I thought of is I know that you're not too far from an old munitions factory, essentially. Munitions base. I don't know what you want to call it. Was it a TNT factory?
Yeah, it was. I'm within probably close to 5 miles south of, in World War II, around the 1941 42 time period, the government was buying land. They wanted to buy land inland from, in a very, a protected area of the country, which would not be found out by the Germans or any other of the enemies and the Axis powers. So they bought a bunch of farms north of me, which they called the TNT, or the Keystone Ordnance Works. That's the formal name of it. It's in today's, it's really between Adamsville and Cochranton, Pennsylvania, and it's right off of US Route 19. It's actually the PPG plant in Meadville is located on the site. This TNT plant, and I think I might have shown you pictures or something, or sent you pictures in the past.
Yeah.
It was just rows and rows and rows of these TNT plants that were spaced out,
and you've actually
over a long period of time.
You've actually shared with me some. I'm trying to remember what the buildings are called. They were dome shaped at one point, but the magazines.
Right.
I went out there, and you said if you go out there, you'll see there's like an A street, a B street, a railroad street, and I found that to be the case. And one of the reasons I bring that up too is because, of course, there's all the stories from Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Again, not terribly far away, where there was the whole Mothman incident. And I know a lot of people have talked about Thunderbird sightings, and some people think, or at least they throw out there, that maybe it was a Thunderbird. I don't know about that, but I do know that there's a TNT factory out by there. And I think it's a similar story, although I'm going to have to look into that. Now, why would a bird have any connection to that, to the production of explosives like that? That doesn't make any sense, but I just thought it was an interesting thing that was the first thing I thought of when you had mentioned that, because I know just historically how much you know about that munitions place, that TNT, but also how close it is to where this occurred.
Yes, I don't know if I could say there's any correlation between it, but certainly there is some anecdotal similarities to the Point Pleasant location. That location, I think the differences are the Point Pleasant location is abandoned, whereas the Keystone Ordnance Works still is the main part of the plant was purchased by PPG, and they still operate there. It's fairly large. They own a huge tract of the land that a lot of these older TNT plants are still located. There's a couple other, I think, businesses, manufacturing locations there. And then there's also the igloos, as we call them. There's A Street, A through M or A through L Street, which has these, well, I don't know, they're magazines that have been made into dwellings. And they're very unusual. They make up part of the Green Township, Pennsylvania Township area, and there's still people that live there. And certainly I've heard anecdotal evidence from some colleagues in the past from Meadville Medical Center that, well, that there is some contamination there. So I don't know. I've never made the connection with any kind of odd beings. There's never been anything that's ever manifested, but certainly I think you can say this is a very rural area where there's a high probability that something, if it's not going to be found out, could hide.
Yeah, and there's the wetlands are not that far away, where there's just a few hundred acres of just preserved wetlands between you and Meadville, if I'm thinking of my map correctly. But also there's a couple very large lakes.
Yes, there's certainly, you have the Erie Wildlife Refuge, which is north of me by probably about 20-25 miles. And then anything really north of me is really considered the snow belt. It's very rural. There's not a lot of cities or towns. It's all small villages, highly wooded areas. And I think from what I've learned about these supposed Thunderbird sightings is that these birds, they dwell in very heavily wooded, sparsely populated areas where there's lots of wildlife. The food chain is plentiful. And, I guess that would make sense. And incidentally, I'm going to say this this is a very weird thing to say here, but since this is the podcast that goes into all things weird and does it well, I did see a very large winged bird again today. I was outside doing some yard work, and this thing was soaring just south of the field. I would say it probably had a wingspan. It was very large. I could see it, but it wasn't as large as what this thing was. It was probably a good 5 feet across, maybe even 6. I don't know what it was. It could have just been a me seeing things to make the show sound better tonight. I don't know, but there's definitely a lot of wildlife here that does not have predators and can survive and maybe grow to be very large.
Well, I'm gonna definitely do my due diligence and see what, again, look obviously in this area to see what are the largest birds, and also go outside this area to see if there's any chance that something was just outside of its typical range. And I'll have to share pictures with you, but I'm gonna have to look up those books, and if I get a copy, I will definitely be sending it your way. But you said the illustration right on it was so strikingly similar to the memory you have.
Yes, and that's pretty much a good description and illustration of what I saw. If you go on Google and you just put in Thunderbird, this iconic picture will come up. It was in the museum of some natural history museum, and it shows this very similar kind of bird. It's stretched out. There is a lot of iconic artwork, but it makes you really wonder that this might be closer than to reality than what we think. I think a lot of people that I've heard have talked about, well, it must be like a pterodactyl or something. This was not a pterodactyl. It was not a reptilian exterior. It did not have the hammerhead looking presentation of what we would think is a pterodactyl. So this was a bird, and it was an extremely large one. And it was a smart bird too. It seemed to know, it was very aware of its surroundings.
Yeah, and I mean, I can understand when formerly believed to be extinct animals are found in the ocean, like the frill shark, of course, the coelacanth everyone talks about. But if you've never watched, there's video of a frill shark, I would look at that because it is like looking at a fossil. Something avian, something that's on the land, it would be very difficult for me to imagine getting away for so long. But of course, it wasn't honestly all that long ago that pandas were thought to be somewhat mythological. I don't know if that's anachronistic, but I've heard as much said. That it really wasn't more than a century ago that pandas were believed to be mythical.
Right. So, I mean, in a way, I guess I'm revealing something that I have not decided to identify until now. I think it has piqued my curiosity. I'm starting to research it a little bit more. And, I've never seen any other kind of cryptid creature in my life. So I guess it's, an opportunity to kind of say, I saw this, I'm not sure what it was. And certainly, I think with Lyman's book here that I found online, that there's certainly some anecdotal and folklore information that would suggest that there was something out there, or that Native Americans, their stories had something real to them.
So, guys, that was my conversation with Brian. I am excited to hear what you both think about it. Like I said, I was really excited because I've heard a lot of Brian's stories. I think he's a good storyteller. He definitely comes from another kind of place. And I had never heard this from him. And he's held this one pretty close because, as he says, this was around 2002. I first met him in June of 2009, and he hasn't told anybody really this story. So, what are your two thoughts?
So I have a few. I have a lot of thoughts on this. First off, it's interesting you said he's a ham radio operator. I would like to hear some of his other stories just to listen to that guy talk. He has an excellent radio voice. Seems like a interesting guy, and I can imagine him being into ham radio. Like when you said that, I was just like, totally. That checks out. But a really, really interesting story. This is one of those ones that we hear quite often where you have someone who is a relatively, no nonsense kind of witness, not someone who's out there looking for stuff like we so often are, but someone who's just going about their day to day life and they see something that they can't explain. and have lots of questions about. Now, the bird that he's talking about, and the first thing I thought whenever he kind of mentioned the dimensions and everything, which you guys covered, was turkey vulture. I've only seen turkey vultures up close maybe once or twice. They are shockingly large and really ugly. They're awful looking creatures. I'm sure they're sweethearts, but they don't look great. Like a 4 out of 10 on the bird scale as far as how they look. But his description of how it was eating and his description of how it moved around the carcass, whether it was hunting it or whether it was scavenging, really kind of put me in his shoes. Like, it was a very effective story. Like, I really felt like his description captured what he saw. Whenever he mentioned that he went outside to get a closer look at it, I think that says two things. One, it says that he is a brave dude. I would have been hesitant. And the second thing it says is that he was inquisitive enough to be like, not thinking, oh, this is a Thunderbird or this is something crazy. It's just, man, that's a big bird. I want to look at it closer. You know, it's just a really natural reaction for someone to have. And you guys covered that he had been on this farm for quite some time. Obviously, he was familiar with the area. He wasn't in an environment that was foreign to him or, transitionary in any sense. So he was familiar with the birds in the area. So the fact that he saw this bird and it was such a large bird that caught him off guard, I think says something in general. I believe you said, Nick, that like the first time you saw an eagle relatively close, you were just like, man, that's a big bird. And I've had similar reactions to seeing eagles up in Oil Creek and other places. When he said this thing stood at what, like 4 or 5 feet from nose to tail, I think, is that what he said?
That was about where he said, yeah.
Yeah, and then he said conservatively a what, 10-foot wingspan, I believe.
Yeah, he was very cautious about saying any more
Yes.
than that, but there were times he alluded that it was, at least 10 feet.
Yeah. And that's like, I mean, we've all seen vultures and stuff, and they're big, but 10 feet is like small, plain big, And that had to have been a really wild thing to see, because again, you're not seeing something like, he was very clear this wasn't one of those Thunderbirds. Again, and he didn't even use that word at the time. He said he just thought it was a big bird. But to see like a corvid bird that is that large has to just be really, really unsettling. And so again, those are kind of my first reactions to it. What all do you think, Mike, of the story?
One of the criticisms you often hear about Thunderbirds is that it's hard to gauge the size whenever it's flying by and you're down on the ground.
Absolutely.
So I thought it was cool that in this scenario, and like you said, not saying it's the Thunderbird, but I thought it was cool that he saw it standing on the ground.
Yeah, at only 50 yards.
So he got a much better idea of what the size could have been. Because I think one of the things I always hear about, when you see a large bird like that flying, it's hard to gauge the size because there's nothing to compare it to.
Absolutely, and I think you're right, Mike. That is one of the big criticisms that you hear anytime you're talking about anything in the sky, whether it is a large bird or, in this field, UFOs or flying humanoids or anything. There's no frame of reference, and I think you're absolutely right with that, Mike.
Well, I mean, it seemed like he's really done his research. And then Nick, I really liked how you brought up the TNT mines being close by, and the correlation there between Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and he even went on to say that the TNT in West Virginia is non-operational now, and the one that's nearby where he was is operational. Sorry.
Well, it's not operational anymore as an explosives facility, but it is very much inhabited and it's very much occupied, and even mentioned some housing. Yeah.
Yeah, he mentioned that there was another account just in that county around the same time period. That's a good source of validation.
No, and I think you're right, Mike, that the fact that he had some kind of validation in the sense that there was another similar sighting relatively near and relatively in the same time frame, because he's right that you don't think about these kind of possible creatures being in this area, especially when you connect it with the Native American Thunderbird mythologies, which I don't know a ton about outside of if anyone has seen the Small Town Monsters documentary Terror in the Skies, they go into Thunderbirds and other winged cryptids or winged humanoids and things like that. And it's one of those things where you have people seeing these really strange things, and oftentimes it's passing or it's really quick. And that's what I think is so interesting about his story is he had enough time to really look at it, really study it, really kind of think about what he was seeing, question elements of it, and also try and get closer. And again, at that range, him saying that it looked like an oversized raven, I mean, there, as far as I know, there are no corvids that size that are at least modern. I'm sure if we go back into history, there may have been corvids that are that size, but usually when you talk about birds that are that big, you're talking about stuff that either has longer necks, looks very different, or just has different characteristics. The fact that, and I don't know either if there are, could birds have gigantism? Like, is that a thing?
Why not?
Yeah, like I don't know. Like,
why not? Let's just say it's an extremely rare case, but it's not unreasonable to think that 1 in a million birds would.
I mean, the theory that the birds have evolved from dinosaurs. Obviously they were much larger at one point.
No, absolutely, and I think that like whenever he was describing the area, especially north of there, there's not a whole lot out there. I know birds do live a long time, so the idea of having even a small population of very large birds, because again, we've all seen birds in the sky that looked way too big, right? Like at least I feel like I have on more than one occasion where you see it and you're
Honestly,
just like,
I don't think I ever have.
Really? See, I feel like on multiple, maybe I need to go. I'm up north too much, but I can remember at least 2 or 3 occasions where I've seen a bird in the sky that looked way too big, and like you said, Mike, I always chalk it up to be like, you know what? It's probably either some kind of an eagle or it's some kind of a vulture, and just my perspective on how far away it is obviously messed up. Because there's no way that's a 10-foot wide wingspan bird,
Well, let me throw this out at you, because I told Brian that I would do my due diligence and look up, what could it possibly have been? What are maybe, especially, and here's what I kind of came with. I mean, one of the largest wingspans of common enough birds in Pennsylvania is the sandhill crane, by what I can figure. And that's so different looking from what he's describing with something with a stout neck. A crane, I mean, one of the most defining features of a crane is its neck, right? So it's certainly not a sandhill crane, especially since, like Mike brings up, he's seeing this on land. He's not seeing it up in the sky where it is a little harder to judge. So then I thought, well, maybe a rough-legged buzzard, a rough-legged hawk. They can get pretty big, about like 2 feet tall, and have a pretty decent wingspan. They are not super common around here, but they are around here. Then the last one that I was thinking about, and this is the one that I think most closely fits the bill, and that would be the golden eagle. While golden eagles aren't particularly common around here, they are known to be in this area, especially a little bit north of us, is typical breeding areas for golden eagles. And despite the name, they are a very dark brown and almost like a blackish gray. They do have a wingspan too that averages just shy of 10 feet even. Usually I want to, if I'm remembering correctly, it's about, and somebody can call me out and look it up real quick, but it's about 9.5 feet wingspan. Pretty significant. Captive golden eagles have been measured to have a wingspan of 9 foot 3 inches. So again, a slightly larger one, it could be possible to see it larger.
Yeah, no, I would agree with everything that you said there. And it looks like like albatrosses and certain condors like do have wingspans over 10 feet. So it's one of those things where I think we could all then agree that like this bird is not like let's take his sizes at what they were, at what he said on the conservative end. The sizes are unusual for birds in this area, but it's not like these birds don't exist. Like there are birds that are this size, at least.
Right. And let's just say this, for the sake of argument, a hypothetical here. Let's say what he encountered was a golden eagle. It's totally understandable for Brian to be kind of spellbound by that because, one, this is back in 2002, where again, our eagle numbers weren't as high as they are even right now. We three have talked about just the bald eagle numbers in our area have gone way up. And of course, the story that I shared is again another sign of that. The golden eagle, like I said when I brought it up, they are not particularly common. Even now, here in Western Pennsylvania, they certainly weren't 20 years ago when this occurred. So again, and if you look up pictures of golden eagles in the area, you can see like they are very dark. And so it would really blow you away to see one. My example, and I edited some of my story out, but it blew me away to see that bald eagle. Had I not been so familiar with the image of a bald eagle, I wouldn't know what I was looking at other than that is a giant bird and I would be freaked out.
Never tell you a story about the first time I saw a fisher cat in the wild?
No.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with what fisher cats are, they're like dire weasels is the best way I can describe them. And like we've all seen like weasels and ferrets and things like that.
A fisher cat or a kingfisher?
Fisher cat. Kingfisher's a bird.
Okay.
Yeah. But fisher cats, they're a lot bigger than a weasel, but they kind of look like a weasel. Not quite as big as a wolverine or badger necessarily, but they're much, much, much bigger than a regular weasel. I was fishing up on Oil Creek years ago and came across one. We both kind of surprised each other as I came over like a mound of grass. He was coming out of a hole, I think, and I was maybe 5 feet away from him. We both surprised each other. I may have said a few expletives. He said a few in fisher cat speak, and he ran off and I stumbled backwards kind of thing. I would have loved to have like really enjoyed that experience seeing a larger animal like that up close, but I didn't know those things existed. Like I did at that time, I didn't know fisher cats were a thing. So I was just like, oh my God, what in the hell did I just run into? I didn't have a frame of reference for it, you know?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That reminds me a little bit. I remember you and I were fishing on the Neshannock some years ago and we came across a mink. And I was just but we knew what it was. It was in a place where you would expect to see one. I was very happy to see it. As a quick question, about how much bigger is this fisher cat compared to a mink?
The fisher cat was significantly larger. I think the mink we saw might have only maybe been like between like 7 and 10 pounds, if I remember correctly. This fisher cat was like a small dog. I'd say probably closer to 20 pounds. Now I'm sure there's a trapper out there who's calling BS on me right now, but that's the size I remember. I remember it being like big enough that like you don't want to tussle with it. You know, it made a very loud hissing noise. We were both upset. Neither of us were pumped about this. Neither of us were pumped.
And weasels can tussle. Anything in the weasel family is kind of known for that.
Known for their tussling ability, absolutely. But just, I mean, the only reason I tell that story is just an example of when I saw that, I didn't have a frame of reference for it. It was just it was a much larger version of something that I did have a reference for. Just like you're saying, he would have had a reference for an eagle, maybe, but these golden eagles are so large that you're right. There's like I think that's absolutely a angle that we have to look at when looking at these stories. But the cool thing about that is how, like, let's say it was a golden eagle, what a wild experience to see a golden eagle at that time feeding that closely. Like, that's just like, either way, it's a super cool experience.
Yeah,
whether
for
whether
sure.
whether there's a paranormal or folkloric or mystic element to it or not.
Now, Brian did bring up that book, and he, during our conversation, showed me the cover of the book. And if you haven't, look it up, go back and listen to the author. I'm going to keep my eye open to find a used copy because it seems like it has been out of print for a while.
It sounds
But he
fascinating.
stated, yeah, absolutely. But he did state, too, that it looked, even though it wasn't a photorealistic drawing, it looked exactly like what he saw.
What that reminded me of is how many stories you hear. This is a complete other tangent, but you hear so many people about the first time they saw the cover of Communion by Whitley Strieber and how they react to seeing that gray alien, because that was one of the first times that what is now almost a trope was presented to the public, where you had
that iconic
Yeah.
image of what an alien is, and that of course would go on to influence really how
Everything.
many sightings of aliens are now fall into that, that
Oh, yeah.
teardrop shape face.
Absolutely. But that's kind of what that reminded me of, and I imagine that was a validating moment for him when you see that and you go, oh, okay, not only have other people seen these things, but enough people that there is some iconography behind it, and enough for someone to put a book together, which is, like, if you see something that's kind of crazy, that has to feel good, in some way, shape, or form, I would think.
For your own sanity.
Yeah, exactly, because like you said, he hadn't spoke to many people about it, and I think that goes to show how much it affected him and how seriously he took the fact that it was in fact something unusual that he was seeing, that he didn't want to invite ridicule or people to question him, which is completely understandable.
For sure. I remember one time, this is going to be such a lame story by comparison. Growing up playing hockey, I spent a lot of time around the ice rink, and outside one of the ice rinks, there's a spring. We would have like 3-hour practices in the summer months, and I think my sister was on or something. Bottom line was, I didn't have to be on the ice. I had some time off. I was walking around the stream behind the ice rink. This is over at Brady's Run Park in Beaver County in western Pennsylvania. And there's a lovely stream that runs just beside the ice rink, just behind it. This was back when there was only one ice surface there, which is a tidbit of information that is of interest to people. Anyhow, I was walking by the stream and I saw a fly on a leaf that was much larger than any fly I had ever seen. It was some sort of horsefly, I'm figuring, but I kid you not, it was the size of my thumb, and I stared at it, trying to come to terms with whether or not it was real, because it was terrifying to me. And it got up and flew away. And I ran back into the ice rink because I've been bitten by horseflies before. But it looked like your typical housefly of unusual size. And it just, I didn't tell anybody after a little while. I told a couple people right away, and they told me, you're an idiot. Flies don't get that big. So I didn't tell anybody for a long time. But some years later, I found out it was this specific type of fly. They do exist, and I remember one time we were having a conversation. I was trying to find it again, and I can't find it again. You were saying
That's so
Brendan.
interesting because it's I don't know if either of you guys listen to the podcast Where Did the Road Go with Soraya, but he has a story about being in the woods with some of his friends. It was back in the 90s, and coming across a bunch of really large flies that looked like horse flies but were much larger. And I think he used the same dimension as like the size of your thumb, like almost like the size of a cicada, but they looked like normal, just regular flies. He found out later, after relaying the story after years and years, that it was some like Peruvian fly or something from like South America. So no reason why it should have been there. Like it still was, kind of an extraordinary experience, but did have a, non-supernatural ending to it. But I think it goes to show the fact that whenever we see things that are larger than what we expect them to be, um, whether it's something in like the reptile part of our brain or something that's way back in there, that it goes, oh, this is unusual. This is in the top like 1% of what these things should be or whatever. And we remember it, we take note of it, we think about it, because I think that's probably an old survival mechanism that our brains have, whether it's because those things are dangerous or because they're a potential food source, maybe. Who knows?
Well, also, when it comes to flies,
they have some kind of a paranormal or spiritual connection.
Well, going back to the Pentateuch, even with your plagues of locusts and flies, and more modern and relatively local, you go up north to the Hinsdale house, and there were all the bees, and then of course the Amityville house, which has the unfortunate taint of the Warren family over it. There was, of course, the stories of the flies.
I mean, just having that imagery in your head and then seeing a larger fly than you would have expected it to be, that would be disconcerting.
Yeah, and I think again, that's kind of what I was trying to say, is that I think there's something in our brains that clicks whenever we see something that is X amount larger than what we expect it to be, that makes us really pay attention. And again, that's why I think his story is so compelling, because he did have such a long time to look at it and study and kind of question it.
Yeah, he said he watched it for the better part of 10 minutes.
Yeah,
I think that's what wild. It was. The bottom line is, it was long enough to get over the sheer dimensions of it alone. It was long enough to shake off any sort of misidentification. So is it a near mythical, extremely rare bird? Maybe. Or is it just another bird that is more well known, obviously, as a golden eagle, but very rare in our area? Again, especially 20 years ago. And you can be taken with it, because, like he said, he's very familiar with a lot of the wildlife in the area, and this did not, fit those characteristics. So anyway, yeah, that was my conversation with Brian. I definitely want to thank Brian for the story. I know it stirred a lot of thoughts and ideas with all of us, and we're going to have another book to look for to add to the shelves of mysterious and fascinating and intensely local phenomenon.
That's the best kind.
Recently, I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos, and I'm starting to watch these different ghost investigation ones with everyone. They all do it. They all have the lights out. Is there something I'm missing? Is there a reason?
I've heard some people say, well, with the electricity, when you turn the lights out, you're not getting any electrical interference. Well, unless you cut the electric off at the main, that's not true, because even with a light out, I'm not going to, replace, even if I've turned a light out, I'm not going to replace my light switch, because there's still current running in that wall. So I think I remember seeing a show too where they were talking about an alien space crash that occurred 50 plus years ago, and they went out to the site in the middle of the night for some reason to investigate a place where a spaceship crashed 50 plus years before. What are you hoping to find after all this time? One, and why did you think it was a good idea to do it in the middle of the night? Two.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything you just said, and I have a few thoughts on this, actually, Mike. One is the production quality, like you guys are saying. It makes it scarier, it's spookier, and none of us can deny that the production value of some of these things, the entertainment value, is a big reason why a lot of us watch these things. Whether the show is whether it's regardless of the I guess the provenance of the investigators, there's an entertainment value to this stuff. Whether it's one person's first time investigating, a reportedly haunted place, or it's some of the bigger shows out there that are on, some of the major TV networks. The entertainment value is something that we can't overlook. Now, there is a duality to that I'm gonna get back to. You know what? No, I'm just gonna say it now. So, if I guess I've talked, you guys know I'm big on the idea of the co-creative element of a lot of paranormal experiences, and if you yourself are in a state of heightened anxiety, adrenaline, whatever, you could argue that you are therefore that much more likely to aid in the manifestation of these entities. So I'm kind of playing devil's advocate to this, So there could, I mean, again, I'm not a paranormal investigator, but I could imagine someone making that argument if that's like the paradigm that you're existing with. So that's kind of the first element is the entertainment, but also possible co-creative part to it. Now, to what Nick said about the whole idea of EVP, or not EVP, about the electronic fields and everything, you're right. If you just turn the lights off, there's still plenty of electromagnetic fields existing within a house. You'd have to literally cut all the mains to do that. Now, here's, again, the kind of counter argument to that, though, is if energy is needed for these things to manifest, you would actually want more electricity.
I had wrote a note to say the exact same thing. You should turn on all the lights.
Yeah, and I know on some of I know I've I can't remember which show it was on, but I know I've heard of people literally taking Tesla coils into haunted places to try and supercharge, like, the ions and everything like that, which is one of those things which, like, I mean, but then they still turn the lights off. It's like which theory are you going with? So, like, there's a double-edged sword to both of those things, I think. Whether it is a entertainment thing, or whether it is a paradigm thing, I think that you see examples of it being not hypocritical, but either maybe not as well thought out one way or the other. Sorry, so that I had to get all that out.
I'm glad you did.
Go ahead.
I think you bring up really good points. I'm kind of jealous that you beat me to it's kind of counter.
I apologize.
No, don't apologize. Like I said, I wrote a little note while you were talking so I wouldn't forget. About why wouldn't you overload the house's breakers or whatnot.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But I think here's another argument too, though. Well, it's not an argument. Well, I guess it is.
Facet.
Yeah. Another factor is maybe, too, that we have such an expectation for when spooky things happen that if it's not dark, we are not as open to, you can't be in the mood for it. There's an expectation of when spooky things happen. There's also setting the mood. There are certain albums you can't listen to unless it's a certain time of the year, or unless you're driving, or you just can't fully appreciate them unless you are in the mood for it. There are certain foods the same way. I have a really hard time eating pizza on a really hot day in the sun. And so I think it might be part of that, even if it's an unvoiced aspect.
I think what you're hitting on there, Nick, is one of the things I think people don't like to talk about with this, because it seems to cheapen it a little bit, is the idea that there is now an aesthetic and a cultural element to this type of ghost hunting, that has, for better or worse, grown up over the last few decades, that is obviously an extension of the spiritualist movement, but and again, I think when people want to say that there's an aesthetic value to ghost hunting, that sounds kind of crazy. But I think that bringing the points up that we're talking about, we're acknowledging that there's so much of our expectation caught up in it that how can there not be a cultural or aesthetic element to it?
Well, I
at that
remember
point?
reading about and even saw some program. This was a number of years ago. I believe the university, I believe it was up in Edinburgh, Scotland, not Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. But they did a series of studies and they concluded that there are certain types of environments in which people are more prone to experience things that they will attribute to the supernatural causes. And so the statement that was made was something to the effect in an interview with one of the researchers is that they haven't yet found haunted places, but they've found haunted people. And there are certain like architectural placements that you can put a person in and they'll be more apt to feel that way, big cavernous places. This is beyond just what cultural expectations like we've talked about, I've mentioned before. Hey, we had interviewed one of your friends, Brendan, and he's in an attic apartment in an old Victorian house. Well, of course it's going to be haunted. All Victorian houses of a certain design are haunted. And so all of these things combined, I just think, yeah, there's an aesthetic, there's an expectation, but also I think even just the act of turning out the lights can make a space seem much more cavernous, and that's one of those things that puts us in a frame of mind. And again, you keep referencing a reptilian brain. I don't know, but I'll have to see if I can't go back and find that study or those researchers from the university who are going into that.
Yeah, again, I haven't heard of that one specifically, but I mean, it sounds absolutely in line with other parapsychology that has been published over the decades that has to deal with our role in places being haunted, and turning the lights off. Could we say at this point too that when ghost hunting, doing it either at night or and like you said with the UFO crash, like maybe not even ghost hunting, just exploring the other, part of the ritual is doing it in the dark. You know, like I think that has to be looked at as one of the elements now.
Well, when you say like the ritual, what I mean, you're just implying that for the entertainment value, is that what you're basically saying?
No, I guess I've kind of moved beyond the entertainment element of it, and like because again, the entertainment element is obviously can be just like you and some other people doing it. But your original question has to deal with documenting it for other people.
Let me throw it like
Yeah.
this way. I can give you a ritual here, Mike. If you were to get a team of friends and go on a ghost hunt, what would be the 5 things you would take with you? You can name them right now. And
Well,
you
you
need
need
a
a camera,
camera?
obviously.
Obviously. Come on,
Obviously.
Mike. This is an amateur hour.
Some audio equipment.
Audio equipment, yeah, there, right. What sort of specific instrumentation would you be inclined to bring beyond the camera? I mean, obviously, you say audio equipment, you want something to record something. What are you hoping to capture with that?
EMF detector or something
EMF
like that.
detector. Exactly. How about a spirit box? So this is the ritual that has really been established just in the past. Some older folks might say bring dowsing rods or whatnot. So I mean, this is what Brendan's saying. I think this is the established tradition now. There's an expectation.
It is cool to see some people, kind of pushing that with, for example, with the spirit box. I mean, I've always had a hard time buying into that, but I do like the Estes method, which we've seen recently a lot.
That's just what I was about to say. I used to give the spirit box almost in Frank's box and everything like that. Not to like disparage anybody, but like I used to give it very very little credit until I came across the Estes method, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant.
Do you know what that is, Nick?
I am not familiar with this, and I imagine other people aren't
Yes.
as well, so please.
So the Estes method is you use the spirit box, which again at this point, most people know it is a device that scans, depending on where you get it made. Some of them either scan random radio frequencies at a very high rate, or other ones are just white noise generators. I'm not sure which is considered a spirit box and which isn't, but it's you use either one of those, and then the person who is listening to it has noise isolating headphones, so they can't hear anything else except for the spirit box, and they also use a high quality blindfold, basically, so they can't see anything. And the idea of using this Estes method, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mike, is so that the people asking the questions in the space are not influencing the person who is listening to the spirit box. So if I say, who is here, and Mike is the one using this, I say, who is here, Mike randomly says, David, Mike didn't hear me ask that question, and so the whole idea is to add one or two more layers of protection between any cross-contamination between the spirit's ability to communicate with somebody through this box versus it being influenced by people asking the questions. Right. Is that a pretty good summation, Mike?
Oh, for sure, yeah. And that's what I'm getting at is, well, I like the idea that people are taking some of these tools which are, questionable, and they're applying them in different ways. Granted, if it comes to the internet, you can't always trust what you're seeing. So if it's
absolutely.
For all you know, they could have a microphone that goes right into the guy's ear. Well, not just the internet, but anything.
The Peter Popoff method, I think that's referred to.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I mean, all this stuff could absolutely be faked anyway. Absolutely.
Right,
and
right.
I think that's the getting back to the entertainment element of it, that's kind of the suspension of disbelief that we have when watching any kind of film or taking in any kind of entertainment is we have a set of presumed principles that we're going to give the creator. We're going to give the entertainer, like, you know what? Here's something that doesn't need to be addressed or answered. And when dealing with spirit hunting of any sort, one of those is that these people are being honest and they're not faking anything. Now, absolutely faking happens across all of these things.
Which is why it's hard sometimes with, when you see psychics.
Yeah, they traditionally, because again, that goes back to the whole connection with the spiritualist movement. Now, granted, a lot of good came out of the spiritualist movement. I think it actually opened a lot of people up. But when you have the Fox sisters, who were basically the antithesis of the spirit movement, proven to be frauds, that's hard to get away from.
I don't think he meant to say the antithesis of the spiritualism.
Not antithesis, the Genesis is what I meant to say.
Yeah, they were a big pillar in that temple for sure.
Yeah.
But again, I'd mentioned even Peter Popoff, who had the earpiece in and everything, and was exposed famously back in the 80s, early 90s. And then he's, again, I remember seeing he was selling miracle water on some infomercial. So, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. They're going to go back to what's worked, especially if it's worked famously. And more to the point, there's so many people that really want to believe a thing. And I can appreciate that. I really can.
Absolutely.
Because I think even me as a doubting Thomas, one of the things that I hope for is that, I can continue on in some manner. It'll be a real drag if I'm trapped within the physical domain of a building that I once spent some time in or whatnot. But it's, I don't really travel far from the house of late anyhow, so really how much different would it be?
Or a place that you were killed in or something. That's like the worst case scenario.
That would be a real drag. That would be like living in terror for all eternity. It sounds like absolute hell. But
that's hell.
But yeah, the bottom line is I think there's enough people that really want to believe, because we want to believe that we go on, because it's the fear, or what it was, the was the Freud thing, the birth of an illusion or something, the life of an illusion, we have a very real fear of our own mortality, a very awareness of it. And I can wrap my head around that, but I can't then take that feeling and put it into blindly put it into the hands of another person, especially when they have been known to violate that trust in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we have, especially like in the broader paranormal field, you have these almost like inalienable things that people kind of like hang their hat on, you know, and then base everything else off of. And I think that what we're talking about with these, like with like the Fox sisters, the reason that was so devastating was because so many people finally pointed to them and said, you know, see, look how look how not crazy I am. So therefore, whenever they are proven to be, people have then a vested interest in them being propped up and not shown as frauds. You see that in the I mean, I feel like I see that a lot in the UFO community where people look at Roswell as like their golden standard. Same like just like the Patterson Gimlin film in cryptozoology. People look at that as like the golden standard. Like if either one of those were proven to be not what people think, not what certain people think they are, then the whole stack of cards crumbles, you know? And that's why people feel so much safer presuming those things and following in these rituals and taking, you know, these tropes and um these cultural norms that have grown up in these different communities.
I think there's a aspect of people, there's a certain number of people who, if the Roswell thing, which I think has been demonstrated to not a weather balloon per se, but I'm trying to remember, had something to do with triangulating the position of launched nuclear weapons. They were using microphones up in there's a point in the atmosphere at which a sound wave travels absurdly long distance.
I'm familiar with that theory. Yeah,
and this was a Cold War technology that didn't really pan out for very long. It had been utilized in the oceans prior, during the end of World War II, possibly to locate down ships or planes. Bottom line, I feel it's been disproven. That were more of a common understood thing, and the whole deck of cards falls. I think there's going to be a large number of people within that UFO community that are going to only become more adamant in what they see as being true, and I think they're going to cling to it all the harder for one reason or another. I'm struggling with words are difficult, and I'm not doing good at them tonight.
I believe what you're saying. Yeah, I believe what you're saying, Nick, is people that put a lot of stock into any of these things as being the absolute unalienable truth end up banking a lot of their identity and their spiritual beliefs on those things. Therefore, an attack on those things is an attack on them.
That is exactly where I want to go.
Is that what you're kind of getting at?
It becomes part of their identity, and what's more, we're able to connect with one another in these communities much more readily than we could in the past. It is a much smaller world in a great number of ways, and as people begin to fall back into those places, I think the natural thing is for us to sort ourselves out into these communities and become even more extreme in them. I think there's a subset of the whole conspiracy community that is definitely falling into the hands of pranksters and whatnot right now. And of course, there's some famous examples like the space is fake and all of that.
Yeah. Well, look, War of the Worlds. You know,
World of
Like-
Worlds it might not be the best. If you're talking about the Orwell radio play,
yeah,
that might not be the.
I'm using I guess I'm using that as an example of
How people can be influenced.
How quickly people can be influenced by something that is because I mean that wasn't even meant to be, like, he wasn't trying to, like, if I remember correctly, and you would be the one to tell if this is true or not, Nick. He wasn't trying to create a mass panic. He was trying. It was an art piece.
That is something that is greatly misremembered because it didn't create a mass panic. There were very, very few people that believed anything was real going on, but it's too good of a story not to say that there was a bunch of people panicking. So there's actual...
Really?
Yeah, there's
See, I didn't know that.
Well, but
I learned something new today.
It still kind of shows your point to a degree because most people cite that event as being, oh, that was a mass... But no, there was no mass hysteria. There were maybe a half dozen people that kind of freaked out. There was one farmer who I guess tried to pursue some sort of legal action, if I remember correctly. You go into the newspapers immediately afterwards, it says nothing of the sort. But of course, it's such a great story. Why wouldn't you want that? Think of the publicity of that. You would be an idiot not to exploit that sort of story. And so now it's remembered as having caused some sort of mass hysteria that it really was not.
Which I think actually proves the point better.
And that's exactly it. It kind of does.
So this is kind of taking a few steps backwards, but this is something I've been trying to ask for a while. Because we're talking about just like the different tools and everything. But I've been wanting to ask you, Mike, for a while, because you actually know quite a bit about like industrial electricity and stuff like that, given your work. Like K2 meters that have become so ubiquitous with ghost hunting. I've always, just through all these things, I've heard that what they do is they measure fluctuations in existing magnetic fields. Again, I'm more familiar with the auditory side of a lot of these things, but how common is it to have measurable fluctuations in either man-made or naturally occurring magnetic fields?
Well, I've actually never used the K2 meter. We do use different types of meters. But something I was going to say about that before you guys were talking about if your lights are off in the house, that there's still electricity in your walls. There's no current. There wouldn't actually be any movement through electricity, but there would still be. It's almost like a faucet. Whenever you turn it on, then it starts moving out. It's in the wall, but it's not actually traveling in a circuit.
Can I say a real funny thing going off of that?
Please do.
Because
you
this
guys
kind
are
of
the
goes
experts
into
here.
our use of technology and using technology that we don't really understand. Early on, when houses were electrified, they would sell. They probably weren't big sellers, but I've seen advertisements for a couple different models. They would sell things that you could cap your electrical plug, not like a child protective thing, but very much like your faucet analogy, Mike. They thought it was like the outlet was like a spigot, and if you left it open, the electricity could potentially leak onto the floor. Now, did people really believe that? I'm sure one or two did, but somebody patented a device.
I mean, that's basically what an arc would be, but it's not likely going to happen in a house,
And they are terrifying when they happen, but I wouldn't look at them and be like, that's going to spill all over my carpet.
That's hilarious. But honestly, like Brandon, with what you were asking, I mean, there's always room for error in instrumentation. I will say, as training as an industrial electrician, which I did for about a year, we never touched those. Yeah, we used multimeters,
like multimeter type,
and then just a tweeter. Yeah. But I will say about those tweeters, which basically is just something you can check to see if there's any current through it, and it's just you just touch the wire, and if it lights up, then you have current. In my old house, which was a much older house, it was over 120 years old, but I would touch areas in the house, like just in the wood, in places that shouldn't be lighting up, and it would still show electric current. So I never knew if it was that was because of maybe some bad wiring somewhere in the house or just a faulty, tweeter.
Oh, that freaked
It
me
wasn't
out.
anything that like scared me. It was like aside from the sense like I don't want my house to burn down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I mean, you guys both know much more about electricity than I do. So, if I touched a 2x4 with something that would light up if there was current and it lit up, I would probably call you.
I would tell you it's haunted.
it's probably a ghost.
Yeah. Either way, it's not good. Either way, I need help.
I mean, wood can still conduct electricity. It's not supposed to conduct it as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know what's going on there.
No, but again, the reason I asked that question is I think it's interesting that all the other things that Nick mentioned with those the things you're always going to bring along are either meant to document in general or they're meant specifically for ghost hunting. The K2 meter I always found interesting because it was something that came from a completely unrelated.
Well, same with the dowsing rods,
and was not. No, that's true. No, okay, yeah,
I've used those before.
I think dowsing rods have always had a spiritualist element. I don't think they've ever been a hard science tool.
I mean, unless you talk to some of these old water witches that
Yeah, but listen.
You
take two sticks. They can be various materials, and you can find water with them, or you can find valuable metals with them. Where's the dial to change the setting? How do I know? What if I'm really thirsty and I just keep finding all this damn gold lying about the place? How useful is this? They lack predictive capability. And again...
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
I actually had one of those older guys try to show me how to do that. A guy who did that for a living. And
I'd love to learn that.
I was not successful with it. It didn't work for me. But
yeah.
Apparently he said
I will not soon forget. There was a lady in our area. I was invited to go to a thing. I opted not to after hearing the spiel. She would be blindfolded, go to cemeteries, and using dowsing rods be able to tell with a 54% success rate, which she touted, whether or not the person was male or female. Now, I told the lady who invited me that I had a much higher success rate just from looking at the tombstone.
See, it's one of those things I would hear that and just be like I'm not doing anything better on a Tuesday night, I probably still would have went just for the story, because if that's the kind of gold you're getting ahead of time, just imagine. I don't know. I feel like that was a missed opportunity.
Hey, Brendan, Thursday I'm going to be walking around a cemetery blindfolded with a couple sticks. You want to come along?
Yes.
I would just love her to be on the trail between graves, just saying male,
female. Oh my god, that's so funny.
Yeah, set dowsers for grave and gender.
Oh my god, that's so funny. No, but you're right. From a definitive standpoint, I think
it is interesting. But my point in my story about the tweeter is that, I mean, things don't always work perfect. And I can tell you that from working in a mill with electricity and mechanical equipment that. Just because it's supposed to work like this doesn't mean it's. I mean, just look at your phones. I mean, you got to shut it off because it's not working right.
No.
Yeah.
There are very small factors that can change the way that current operates too. I remember having to change a plastic distributor cap because there was a scratch on the inside of the distributor cap plastic that was causing the Honda Accord to arc. And again, arcs are very scary. And it's just a simple thumbnail scratch inside a plastic cap that goes over to the distributors. Electricity is a weird thing, and like Mike says, it can be a simple thing can make it be extremely unpredictable and weird.
Brendan's gonna hate me for saying this at the end, but I forgot to mention before, Mercer County is a weird place. There's a lot of weird stories I hear about there.
Oh my god!
No denying that.
Yeah, dude, that's one of the things I'd love to look into. Is one, just the idea that this stuff happens everywhere. But Mercer County, we could do a Mercer
sure.
County centric show.
Listen, Mercer County is the home of not only the Crooners Hall of Fame, or is it the Vocalist Hall of Fame? It is the National Button Accordion Festival Ground Zero. But Mercer County also houses the largest distributor of clogging material, information, books, and accoutrements for clogging.
That's for a different podcast.
So there you are.
Not surprised.
Mercer County.
Yeah.